Today we're going to be learning how to graph a line when given an equation of that line in slope-intercept form. So slope-intercept form is a type of equation or a form of an equation that uses the slope and the y-intercept to write an equation of a given line. So we've been working with slope a little bit. So the slope is the change from one point to the next. How does the line change as it goes? The y-intercept is where that line crosses our y-axis. Okay, so remember that on a graph, we've got our axes. Okay. Remember that our y-axis is going to be this up and down axis right here. Okay, so the y-intercept is going to be where that line crosses the y-axis. So this is my y-intercept. We're going to use slope-intercept form to graph the line. Now, there are other ways that you can graph a line given the equation, but slope-intercept form, in my opinion, is one of the easiest ways. So, slope-intercept form of a line is the following. Y equals mx plus b. Okay? Now, in this equation, my m, the number next to x, is my slope. Okay? It's the number that is directly connected to x when y is by itself. Okay? My b is my y-intercept. It tells me where this line is going to cross the axis. So the first thing we need to do when we're working with these slope-intercept form equations is we need to figure out the pieces of these equations so that we can use them to do the graphing. So number one, y equals 3x plus 5. Okay, x and y are going to stay x and y all the time. Okay, the only numbers that are going to change here in slope-intercept form is this m next to x and this b, the number that's all by itself. Okay? So then slope is my number directly next to x. So in this case, my slope is 3. On the other hand, my y-intercept, my b, is the number that's all by itself, which in this case is positive 5. Okay? Let's look at another example. Number 2, the slope of this equation, y equals 2x minus 1. The slope is the number connected to x. Okay. In this case, 2 is the number connected to x, so 2 is my slope. My y-intercept is the number that's all by itself. This one is a little tricky because instead of being a positive number like this one, or like my general form, this one has actually a negative y-intercept. Okay, in this case, my y-intercept is negative 1. For number 3, y equals negative 4x plus 2. I'm just going to follow that same process. So the slope is my number connected to x when y is all by itself. The number connected to x in this case is negative 4, so negative 4 is my slope. My y-intercept is the number that's all by itself. In this case, that is positive 2. So my y-intercept for this equation is 2. Okay? We will do more practice with identifying these pieces until this gets a little more comfortable for you. Once we have identified the slope and the y-intercept, we're going to use those two values to help us graph this equation. So when I'm looking to graph an equation from slope-intercept form, the first thing that I'm going to look for is to see if y is alone. Okay, so remember that slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. Okay, so if y is not by itself, I cannot follow this process. Okay, so I want to check to see that y is by itself first. The ones that we're going to encounter in this class all have y by itself. Okay, but that's not always the case, so it's important to check that before we get started on our graphing. All right. So first thing I want to do is make sure that y is by itself. In my first example, y is by itself, so I'm good to go there. So what I'm going to do first is identify my slope and my y-intercept, just like we did in the previous examples. So I'm going to identify my slope, which we represent with variable m, and is the number directly next to, connected to, my x. So in y equals 2x plus 1, 2 is the number next to x, so 2 is my slope. I also need to identify my y-intercept. I'm not going to write that all the way out, but you're more than welcome to. My y-intercept in a slope-intercept equation is the number that's all by itself. So in this case, the number by itself is 1. So my y-intercept here is 1. Now that I have those values, I'm going to use those to actually put the line on my coordinate plane. So the first thing I want to do is I want to plot the y-intercept on the y-axis. Okay, so remember that our y-axis is this axis that goes straight up and down. Okay. If my y-intercept is at positive 1, I'm going to start from the middle, and I'm going to go up 1 on that axis. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plot that point based on whatever my y-intercept is. This was a positive 1, so I went up 1 on the y-axis. This is going to be your starting point. Once I have my starting point, so I did that, done, I'm going to use the slope to help me draw the rest of the line. Okay? In order to do that, I need to write my slope as a fraction. Okay? When we worked with slope, we talked a lot about how slope can be a fraction and frequently will be a fraction. Okay? When we are graphing this, slope actually has to be a fraction. Okay? My slope here is 2. That's a little unnerving to start with because it feels like 2 isn't a fraction. But remember that any whole number can be written as a fraction by putting 1 in the denominator. Okay? So if I have 2 as a whole number, I can write that as a fraction as 2 over 1. Okay? It is very important that you're rewriting the slope as a fraction because each of those pieces tells me something different. The top number is going to be my rise. It's going to tell me how to move up or down from one point to the next point. Okay. The run, the number on the bottom, is going to tell me how to move side to side, how to move left or right from one point to the next. Okay. Essentially, we're doing the opposite of what we did when we found the slope. Okay. So, my slope for this first example was 2. I rewrote that as 2 over 1 because I do want it to be a fraction. And then I'm going to take each piece of these and kind of make a roadmap of where I'm going to go between points. So the top number is going to tell me how to move up or down. If my number is positive, it tells me to move up. So in this case, I'm going to go 2 up. Okay. You do not have to draw this line when you're working with your slope, but I'm going to do that just to show you what I'm working with here. Okay. The bottom number is going to tell me how to move left or right. Again, if it's a positive number, I'm going to move to the right. If it's a negative number, I'm going to move to the left. So I have positive 1, which means that I'm going to go 1 to the right. Okay. So now I'm actually going to follow this roadmap. I'm going to start at my first point, at my y-intercept, and I'm going to go 2 up and 1 to the right. Once I get there, I'm going to draw a point. And then I'm going to repeat this process. I'm going to go up 2 and 1 to the right until I get to my next point. Okay? Again, you should not be drawing these connecting lines. Okay, I'm just doing that to show you what I'm doing. Okay. Once I've plotted these points, I've gone 2 up and 1 to the right, 2 up and 1 to the right, and I ran out of space on my graph. That's fine, it happens, it's not a big deal. But I want to make sure to make as many points as possible so that my graph is as accurate as it can be. So before, I was going 2 up and 1 to the right. In order to make more points, I'm going to go and switch both of those directions. So instead of 2 up and 1 to the right, I'm going to go 2 down and 1 to the left. So I'm going to go 2 down and 1 to the left, and I'm going to put my point there. Again, I shouldn't be drawing these connecting lines. I just want you to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to go 2 down and 1 to the left and put a point, and 2 down and 1 to the left and put a point. And I'm going to do that until I run out of space and I cannot put any more points on the line. The very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect that with a straight edge. So that I've got a nice straight line through all of those points. Okay. Your line may not be perfect. As you can see down here, mine missed that point a little bit, and that's okay. That's one of the reasons that we put so many points on the line. Okay. So let's take a look at this second example. The first thing I want to do is identify my slope and my y-intercept. This one's a little tricky because my slope, the number in front of x, is a little tricky here. It doesn't appear that I have a number in front of x, but I have a negative sign there. So the number that's really in front of that x is -1. Okay. My number that's all alone is my b, my y-intercept. In this case, my y-intercept is -4. Now that I've identified both of those, I'm going to start at my y-intercept. Remember that my y-axis is this axis that goes up and down. And my y-intercept is -4. So on this axis, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 down, and I'm going to plot that y-intercept point. Again, this is going to be my starting point as I begin to graph the rest of my numbers. From here, I'm going to use the slope to give me directions on how to get to the next point and the point after that and the point after that. We're going to do that by writing this as a fraction. Again, we're starting with a whole number, but that's not a big deal because I can write any whole number as a fraction by putting 1 underneath it. So my slope of 1 is written as the fraction -1 over 1. Excuse me, my slope of -1 is written as the fraction -1 over 1. Okay. Now we're going to figure out our directions. The top number is going to tell me to go up or down. In this case, my number is a negative number, so I'm going to go 1 down. Okay. My bottom number is going to tell me how to go left or right. Again, if I have a positive number, I'm going to go to the right. If I have a negative number, I'm going to go to the left. In this case, my number is positive, so I'm going to go 1 to the right. I'm going to start at my y-intercept point. From here, I'm going to go 1 down and 1 to the right, just like my slope tells me to do, and I'm going to put a point there. I went 1 down and 1 to the right. Now, ordinarily, I would continue doing this. I would go 1 down and 1 to the right, and 1 down and 1 to the right, and 1 down and 1 to the right, but I've run out of room. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to flip both directions. I'm going to restart at my y-intercept, and I'm going to add more points by flipping both directions. Instead of 1 down and 1 to the right, now I'm going to go 1 up and 1 to the left. So there's my next point. Again, I start back at my y-intercept, and I'm going to flip both directions. 1 up, 1 to the left. And I'm going to keep doing that until I run out of room again. 1 up and 1 to the left, 1 up and 1 to the left, 1 up and 1 to the left, 1 up and 1 to the left. And you should see that these begin to form a line. And all my last step to do is to connect them with a nice straight line and add my arrows to the end. Okay, it's important to add those arrows because these lines are going to go on forever and ever and ever in both directions. We run out of space on our coordinate plane, but our line continues going forever and ever and ever and ever. So what I'm going to have you do now is practice identifying the slope and the y-intercept from an equation. Once we do that, we'll be able to do the guided practice and work on actually using those values to put our line on the graph. Okay? If you have any questions, make sure you write them down and bring them to class. We'll address them when I see you next.